move on now to Laura. Thanks for coming to see us today.
Yeah.
So are you okay there?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
Thanks a million for the invitation to be here, and thanks to Pauline for hosting, and the Green Party and Mná Glasa for having me down. My name is Laura Harmon. I work for the National Women's Council. For those of you that mightn't have heard of us, we're a national membership organisation in Ireland. Our primary goal is to campaign for equality between men and women in Ireland. We were founded in 1973, so we've been around for quite a long time now. Mná Glasa are one of our 180 group members, and we've individual membership as well. I suppose my role as Women in Leadership Officer with the Council, it involves working with to promote women in politics, but also to promote women in business as well. And we work a lot with young women in terms of training, and we run a big conference, for example, in winter called FemFest, which is to empower young women, particularly from disadvantaged backgrounds. So that's kind of, I suppose, a background on myself. We're also a member of the European Women's Lobby, so I'll be a member of their Women in Politics working group, which we're kind of working towards the EU elections to see how we can work with other countries to promote women on that level as well. I suppose so. I'm going to talk a little bit about, I suppose, the kind of status quo at the moment in terms of women in politics in Ireland, and maybe touch on another number of areas as well as to where women are kind of underrepresented, and maybe look at that and why that is, and why we need more women in those areas as well. So I suppose we're here now in 2017. Next year will be the centenary of when women won the vote in Ireland, and certainly we've come such a long way, I suppose, from even the 1970s when women got married and they had to give up their job, in the public service, for example. It would have been unthinkable back then in the 1970s that we would ever have a woman president, for example, and then we ended up electing two, of course, when it came to the 1990s. But as Catherine said, I mean, we're 52% of the population. We still have a huge, long way to go. I suppose if you look at the first, cabinet minister that was elected would have been Countess Markievicz in 1922, and then we had to wait until 1979 until we elected the next cabinet minister, which was Maura Gagan Quinn. So there was a huge period of time there where no woman got to that position, and I suppose a lot of that was to do with the real underrepresentation of women in politics at the time as well. And of course we still have the clause in our constitution that a woman's place is in the home, and I think that's certainly something that needs to be looked at and needs to be removed. And I know there's a commitment from the Constitutional Convention that there'll be a referendum on that in the future. So I think we still have that overhang from the original constitution that was put in place. I won't go through too many of the stats in detail now, because I know a lot of them have been covered, but I mean, we could see from the general election in 2016, 22% of women TDs were elected, and that was largely because of the quota that was put in place, so the 30% quota that was introduced for political parties, and if they didn't meet the quota, half of their state funding would have been cut. So I think the important thing about the quota was that there was an implication behind it as well, so it was a real impetus for parties from a financial perspective to implement it. And we saw the highest number of women ever contesting general elections, just under 30% nationally back in 2016. And if you compare that then to the general election in 2011, where just 15% of women were elected, and it was a similar number of women that actually ran at the time as well. So it shows there is a correlation, as Pauline said, when women do run, they do get votes and they do get elected as well. So it's not a case that the population tend to vote more for men than women. That's simply not true at all. And then if you look, I suppose, going back in time, so 15%, as I said, for the 2011 general election, it was very stagnant in the preceding years. So there was only a 3% increase between 2011 and 1992, for example. So without the quota, things really weren't progressing at all. And the EU average now, Ireland ranks at 25 out of 28 EU countries. So the average for women is 27% on an EU level. So we are falling quite below that as well. And just in terms of, I suppose, this we hear it a lot, there's not enough women, we can't find them to run. And again, that's something that's, I suppose, simply not true. There's a great research paper actually that was published a number of weeks ago. I'd recommend you to look it up. It's available online. Dr. Fiona Buckley in UCC and Dr. Mary Brennan, who is in UCD, they published a paper looking at, I suppose, the effect of the quota and how it's worked and how it hasn't worked. And one thing they stated was that they looked back in times of 2011 again with the 15% of women that were running. If you compare that to the levels of party membership, so at the time there was between 30 and 40% women members of political parties, yet they only ran 15%. So there are women who are active within political parties. They are there. And then if you look at one of the most popular professions, if you look at TDs, I suppose their professional background, their profile, a lot of TDs were started out as teachers, and 84% of the teaching profession are women. So even if you kind of look at it from that perspective, there are a lot of women out there who are very connected in their communities, very active. So there are plenty of women candidates there, I suppose, to be selected to run. One of the reasons stated for why women maybe don't put themselves forward for election, a lot of research has been done on this, and you probably heard about the 5 C's before. If you haven't, they're candidate selection, culture, cash, confidence, and childcare. So 5 of the primary reasons why maybe women don't put themselves forward to run for election. So in terms of the confidence factor, it's been shown that women need to be asked on average 3 times to put themselves forward for election or for a promotion, for example, whereas a man would only need to be asked once. So it's a case of the need for encouragement. And I think that's really been proven by a lot of the work that's been done by Women for Election, for example, in the training that they've been doing and the encouragement that they've been giving women to run for election. It's been shown that that has been needed and that it does work as well. In terms of the cash factor, in terms of money, I mean, we know there's a gender pay gap there. I think it's on average of about 14% that women will earn less over their lifetimes than their male counterparts. Women are also more likely to be in precarious work or part-time work, where they're on lower salaries and lower hours. And then if you look at childcare, I was at a conference just there during the week, and there was a presentation by Task, the economic think tank, and they were talking about income inequality in Ireland and how we could kind of level up the playing field. And they ended their presentation, they said that the one area that would really make a huge impact would be investment in childcare, and that would really, I suppose, help people from more disadvantaged backgrounds, and also women as well, in terms of economic inequality. And women also tend to be doing more of the caring responsibilities, so be it within the home with children, but also with older persons. So they might be looking after their parents, for example. A lot of this work goes unrecognised, and I suppose it impacts on their ability to be more active then outside of that. So that was another area. And then if you look at, I suppose if we look back at the 2016 general election again, and around the kind of narrative around quotas, has been mentioned before, a lot of stuff came up around meritocracy. So it was like, oh, but the woman has to be the qualified candidate, whereas we never hear that when it comes to the men. You never hear. It's almost like the woman has to be superwoman in order to be seen as, I suppose, the best candidate. And we've seen some of the kind of fight backs against that as well. I mean, there was a court case taken by a Fianna Fáil activist who wasn't selected, for example, due to the quota. As far as I know, he didn't succeed, but I think it's under appeal at the moment. And we also have seen, I suppose, a lot of political parties getting worried now as well, or saying that they don't know how they're going to meet the quota in future, because the quota is going to rise to 40% in 2023, which of course is a great thing. So it's going to push parties to really, I suppose, up their game in terms of getting more women on the ballot paper. But it's been proven, we saw from the general election, I know Catherine said, 22%, it isn't exactly amazing, it should be 52% if that's the population of women, but it was shown that the women who ran were great, vote getters. They were able to get out there, win the votes, and they did get elected. So I think political parties have been shown that it does work and they can run more women. But then if you look at the local elections, so 16% representation at a local level on average, that's only increased by 1% over the course of a decade. If we were to level up the playing field, it would take until 2250, the year 2250, at the current pace of change, in order to get the kind of 50% number. So there's no quota, of course, at local level. And I think that's something that needs to be looked at, introducing a quota, because that is the pipeline, going from councillor to TD would be kind of a traditional route, I suppose, of progressing in politics. So that's something I think, the National Women's Council will certainly be looking to work with political parties on and see how that can work, and if there's any, potential for legislation around that area, would be something that we would love to look at. If you look at the Seanad, 18 out of there's 18 senators there at the moment. Committee chairs, I don't have the exact figure because I know there's been a lot of new committees set up, but women are underrepresented when it comes to chairing committees within the Oireachtas as well. The cabinet, I mean, we all saw, I suppose, the missed opportunity when Leo didn't appoint more women to senior cabinet positions as well. So they're underrepresented even kind of within the Oireachtas structures themselves. I suppose just in terms of myself, I know Pauline mentioned that I worked in student politics for a number of years. I was president of USI in the year 2014-2015. And when I got elected to that position, it had been 20 years since a woman had been in that position before. And I suppose you can see it even at a student level that women are very underrepresented. I think it hovers between 15 and 20% student representation in student unions across the country. And there has been a lot of work being done at the moment in terms of training students to run for election as well, and working with women for election. I know USI are doing a lot of work around that area as well. I also I actually ran for the Seanad for the NUI panel in 2016 as well. I just decided to run as an independent candidate. And I found the experience was great. You really learn a lot. So I think, if you were thinking of running for election, definitely give it a go. I was obviously unsuccessful, but I did a lot better than I thought in the election, and it was a really, really good experience. And there hadn't been a woman elected to the NUI panel in the Seanad for a number of decades, so it was great to see Alice Mary Higgins elected there as well, and there was a really strong kind of women transfer vote in the election, so it was brilliant. And I would definitely encourage anybody to run for election, and you learn so much about yourself along the way as well. So just in terms of, I suppose, what can be done to kind of tackle this, I suppose quotas is one thing, but there's a whole I suppose tranche of things that can be done to improve, I suppose, women's representation within politics. Training was one thing. Again, it was great to see that Women for Election, they had a crowdfunding campaign going there over the past number of weeks to raise €50,000 to train more women for the local elections, and they exceeded that target, and I think they're still exceeding it. And I think it was only within a matter of maybe a week or two they managed to do that. So there's a huge appetite obviously for people to support this and to get more women in. The National Women's Council, we published a paper which you can find online. It's very accessible. It's called the Parliament of All Talents, and it was about how we can create a more women-friendly Oireachtas. So there was a number of recommendations within that paper, and one of them included a women's caucus. So it's fantastic to see the work that Catherine has been doing around that, and to see how that will progress into the future. So that was a really brilliant initiative, for women within the Oireachtas, and for them to have that network as well, and that support network. Increasing paternity and maternity leave is another thing, and I know again Catherine is working on that at the moment. But if you look at other parliaments like in Scandinavia, in France, they have that in place for members of parliament. So that's something that I think could be looked at. I suppose it's quite an unfriendly environment in the Oireachtas when it comes to families. So when you see all those really late night debates that often go on, there's no video conferencing options or remote voting, for example, and they have that in place in a number of other countries. They have it in Australia, the Dutch do it, the Scottish do it a little bit as well. A code of conduct is another thing that we would have recommended in that. So I mean, I don't know if you remember the time of Lapgate. I think it was during the X case legislation debate in the Oireachtas, where one TD, Tom Barry, pulled another Anya Collins onto his lap during the debate, and it was kind of televised around the world, and he apologised profusely afterwards, but obviously that was something that wasn't appropriate. We often see that, where language is being used that can be quite sexist, or you see a lot of maybe women representatives being interrupted a lot during their speeches and things like that. So a code of conduct in the Oireachtas was another thing that we suggested. Gender sensitivity training as well, and professional development training for members of the Oireachtas was another thing, so that they could be maybe educated a bit more around gender issues, and conducting an audit of gender in the Oireachtas and kind of monitoring that over a long period of time, and setting in place markers as well was something that we had. But I suppose one of the key things really is education as well, within our schools. I mean, I would never have heard it, and I don't know if you would have had, but I think nobody will ever ask you in career guidance, like, why don't you become a TD or a politician? Why don't you go into politics? And I think education around that, and education about, I suppose the public good that public representatives are actually doing would probably be something that we could include, because there's a lot of negativity out there, I think, around, politics and politicians, and really what they're doing is I think 99% of them are really trying to do their best and make a difference in the world, and I think having it in the education system might be a good thing. We did some research as well in the Women's Council called Through the Looking Glass. This would have been 2 years ago as well, and it showed that young women, as they get older, so say in their early teens, they're more confident about their leadership abilities than they are in their later teens or their early 20s, and a lot of that came down to body image. So that was another finding that we had, this impact that body image has on women and the way they're talked about in the media and the way they're talked about on social media as well. So leadership training for young women is something that, we really identified in the Women's Council as something that we want to progress more for the future as well. Just in terms of other areas of public life, just very, very quickly, if you look at business, state boards, we've hit 39% now women representation on our state boards. It varies. Some of them have exceeded the 40% target, but that target was put in place by the government back in the early 90s, so it's taken them that long to hit it. It's taken them 20 years to hit that target, but there was a target there. But then if you look at women in business, they're only 16% representation on our corporate boards. So some countries have quotas in place for corporate boards. We don't have that in place in Ireland, and we're really lagging behind when it comes to the stats on an EU level as well. Less than a quarter of our voices on national radio are women. Men dominate when it comes to talking about economics, when it comes to talking about sports. Men make up about 75% of voices that you'll hear in the media on that. When it comes to the arts, women are underrepresented. You might have seen the Waking the Feminist movement, which I think is fantastic, and it was a kind of a hit back, I suppose, as to how women were underrepresented in theatre or when it comes to director level or high profile roles. I was at a conference yesterday actually called Inspirefest in Dublin, and it was all about women in tech, and it was really looking at how women are underrepresented when it comes to STEM, so science, technology, engineering and maths. And it kind of talked about, women working in big tech companies, so like Google or Facebook or Twitter. And some of the research found that, the reasons that they kind of drop out of those career roles and go into other career paths wasn't anything to do with their gender, but it was because they didn't have mentors. They didn't have anyone in there giving them a clear career path, and there was kind of bad management structures in place. So it applies to technology as well. In terms of education, women outperform men when it comes to educational attainment across the board. Women have higher attainment of second level education marginally. When it comes to third level, 58% of women, I think up to the age of 35, have a third level education compared to 46% of men. And then if you look at our universities, as Micheline pointed out, there's clear problems there. But we've got 7 universities in Ireland, and I think the oldest is Trinity, and it's about 425 years old now. And in those 425 years, we've never had a woman president of a university in Ireland. So it's really stark when you look at that in the education sector. So just, I suppose, kind of why more women and why do we need more women? The businesses are really catching on to this because they can see the benefits of it. So lots of research has been done as to why it's good to have diversity when it comes to, the boardroom tables, when it comes to senior management within corporate companies, because it improves their sales. So it's been proven that if you have gender balance within a company, a for-profit company, you increase your sales by 16% on average. So it's a real business case for equality from that perspective. It kind of counteracts against groupthink as well, because the more diverse people you're bringing to the decision-making table, the more backgrounds that they're bringing, the different knowledge that they're bringing, so you're more likely not to have that groupthink in place. And there was a report done after the banking crisis called the Nyborg report, and it shows that a lot of the bad decisions, I suppose, that were made in banking were made by men because the institutions were dominated by men, and the case is kind of made that if it was more gender balanced, that maybe some of those decisions could have been prevented. Of course, that's hindsight, but that's one report that is out there as well to maybe have a look at. And the other, I suppose, thing as well is just it's been shown across the world that when women are in power in politics, that they do tend to focus on women's issues, not just women's issues, but they tend to put them forward where maybe they wouldn't be in the first place. We can already see, that happening here in Ireland. I mean, if you look back, the fight for contraception, which was only kind of universally legalised in the early 90s, someone like Mary Robinson, for example, would have been fundamental in campaigning for that. We can see the work that's been done on childcare at the moment as well. And we can see the work that, like, Catherine is doing in relation to the caucus, in relation to maternity leave, for example. I mean, it's often women are the ones that are pushing those issues as well as all of the other issues. So it's important to, I suppose, get women in to push those issues as well. And I suppose, I'll just finish by saying, again, what Catherine said, you can't be what you cannot see. So from a role model's perspective, I think that's why it's, really important for women to be at the top table in all aspects of society, so that younger women can aspire to get there as well one day. So thanks very much.